City of Stevens Point Finance Committee meeting, recorded August 9, 2021.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the Finance Committee meeting, and I will call it to order at 7:31 p.m. The first non-action item actually is an action item for someone to do the roll call, please.
Yes, and I can call the roll. Dalton.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Morrow.
Here.
Shore.
Here.
Slowinski.
Here.
All right, 5 present.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And the next item on our agenda is a presentation of the 2020 audit report by Baker Tilly. We did get some information sent to us, of course, and a lot of information, but I do look forward to the narrative from our friends at Baker Tilly. Please go ahead.
Hey, Carla, you're on. Just tell me next when you need to move a slide.
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening. I'm Carla Govan, a partner with Baker Tilly, and I'm going to be going through the reporting and insights document this evening. Mayor, you can move to page 5, please.
I bet I can.
So I wanted to start by thanking Corey and his team members. It is, as I've said before in other years, it is no small task getting ready for the financial audit. And as you mentioned, you have a lot of information to consider as we go through our comments tonight. For those of you that have been on finance in the past, I think you're going to hear a lot of common themes. There are no surprises this evening, and a lot of really good financial information, financial results, as well as the information from our reporting insights. So I know you do have a full agenda tonight. I'm really going to put my comments into really kind of 2 categories. I'm going to start with some of the responsibilities and required communications, and then I'm going to pivot to going through the financial highlights. And the financial highlights do come directly from the financial statements. But as is noted here on page 5, I just want to highlight a few things. As it relates to our responsibilities, we are responsible for providing assurance about whether the financial statements are free from material misstatement, and that is a high level of assurance. As you can see from the 2nd and 3rd bullet points, we do perform a risk-based audit approach, and so we do factor that into our audit planning and the execution of our audit. And then if you go down, forming and expressing an audit opinion, we do issue an audit opinion. That's what you hire us to do. And we did issue a clean or unmodified audit opinion on the financial statements. That's the highest level of assurance you can receive. It's what you've received in the past and what you should expect to receive. So I'll have you move to page 6, please. Page 6 outlines management's responsibilities, which are to prepare, even though we do draft the financial statements for management's convenience, management does provide us with the records in order to do so. We do not make material adjustments to those records as we are pulling the financial statements together. Management's also responsible for ensuring an effective internal control environment. We do not audit the controls of the city, but we do gain an understanding of the control environment and do factor that into our audit approach. Due to the federal and state grant funding that the city receives, we do also look at the compliance associated with receiving that funding. And then lastly, management does provide us with written representations, and those representations are included within this packet. I'll have you move to page 8, please. So significant changes to the audit plan, there were none. So we developed our plan, which again, it won't be long, and we'll be developing our plan for the 2021 financial audit, but there were no significant changes. I'll have you move to page 10, please. And I'm just really going to have you pause on this particular page. I am going to highlight a few things, but I might make you dizzy if I have the mayor jump through these pages rather quickly. I will pause, and if there are sections that you want me to come back to, I'd be happy to go into things in more detail. But this particular section of the report is really on pages 10 through 18 is really what I'm covering in these comments. And we start with the plan scope and timing, and we look at key transaction cycles and significant estimates. We have key areas of focus that we look at during the audit process, and one of those significant areas has to do with management override of controls. So each year we do modify our audit approach. We ask a lot of questions. We do substantively test or look at a lot of invoices and receipts as a part of our audit process. Included in this section are also required communications related to the internal control environment, as well as other required communications. All that is included in here is very consistent with what you've seen in the past, and for that I'm not going to go into it in detail, but again I will pause at the end, so if there's something you want to come back to, I would be happy to do that. So at this time I'm going to move to page 20. So we're going to jump ahead here. And this is just more for informational purposes. GASB stands for the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. They do set the accounting standards that the city must follow. I teach quite a bit of CPE or continuing education, and one of my quiz questions is what GASB was in place when I started at Baker Tilly 29 years ago, and that was GASB 11. So we're up to GASB 97 in the last 29 years. And so we've listed here what's in front of the city, and we're certainly happy to work with the city as it works through those that would be applicable to the city. So then with that, I'm going to move to page 23. Again, I'm just going to have you pause on page 23 and make a comment. So pages 23 through 26 are just things that we think are noteworthy in the public sector, in the governmental arena. Myself and my team, that's all we do is work with cities, towns, villages, counties. All the work I do is in the state of Wisconsin. We do have a practice that extends beyond Wisconsin. But these are things that we think, again, might be of interest that we've included for your consideration. With that, I'm going to have, Mayor, you move to page 28. And I'm just going to have you pause at this page because then I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions, and then I will finish my comments with some financial highlights. But again, the client service team, or what kind of rounds out the narrative portion of this document, is myself as the client service partner, Cameron Sawyers, our senior associate, actually he was just promoted to manager, as well as Casey Sporl, she's also been promoted to manager. So we just wanted to provide you with our contact information, our phone number, our email, should there be anything that you'd like to reach out to us about. But again, included in this portion of the narrative is the management representation letter. I mentioned that earlier. As a part of doing the financial audit or performing the audit, we do not look at every transaction. That would be cost prohibitive, and it's not typical by professional standards. But as a result, we do need to rely on management to make certain representations, and so that has been included for your informational purposes. And then we do include some two-way communications, which, just as I mentioned earlier, as we wrap things up for the 2020 audit, we'll begin planning not too far into the future on the 2021 audit. So I'm going to pause there to see if there's any questions so far. If there are none, then we're going to jump to page 43, and I'm going to go through some of the financial benchmarks and highlights.
I'm going to ask the committee if they have any questions at this point.
Looking around, everyone is shaking their head, so it doesn't look like it.
Oh, then I have a question.
Sure.
Could you help me understand the new standards for leases and how that came about and why that is something we need to be focused on, please?
Sure. So the lease standard, GASB does often model their standards off what is happening in the private sector world. So that's the FASB world. And the concern is that in today's environment, governments might have operating leases that today are only required to be disclosed in the financial statement as a footnote disclosure. And I don't believe the city has anything noted as an operating lease. However, the standard setters are saying, well, if you do have an operating lease, and for example, you have the right to use an asset, over something that is longer than 12 months. And you're obligating funds of the community for the right to use that asset, even if you're not using that asset 100% of the time. It might be you're leasing some space to provide park and rec activities, but you're going to lease that space 2 days a week for the next 3 years. GASB's saying, well, you've committed funds for that. So not only do you have the right to use that asset, so that should come on as a right to use asset, you've also obligated money, and so that should come on as an obligation. The thought is that there's financial transactions that are not being captured as obligations and assets, and the lease standard is trying to rectify that.
I see, so it's sort of creates a future liability based on the length of the lease?
Correct.
Thank you, very helpful information. I have more, I'm sure, but that's one of the big ones I have. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? So I'm going to then move to I am seeing an error. I don't know if you guys do by chance.
I don't see an error.
Okay, perfect. I guess I do see your screen, so that's good news. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the results for the city, and I'm going to focus on the general fund, which is the main operating fund of the city, and then we're going to pivot to some debt results. So I'm going to have you stay on page 43 for a moment, and then we'll pivot to some debt results, and then I'll finish my remarks with some results related to the enterprise funds. So this first graphic, as I mentioned, is your general fund results. It's your fund balance, which is essentially your working capital, if you will, for the city, because the city does record things that are more liquid or current in nature. And so you can see your total fund balance. The black line is from 2019, the green line is from 2020, and you can see your fund balance did decrease by about $2.1 million. But fund balance is broken up into the various categories. I'm going to actually start at the bottom of this graphic with your non-spendable fund balance, and that represents fund balance or equity, but that is not liquid in nature. And so the most significant portion of this has to do with advances or loans that the general fund has made to other funds, in particular the TIF districts. And the advance from the general fund to TIF number 6 did go down significantly, so that's why your non-spendable portion of fund balance went down. Your restricted fund balance remained relatively flat. That represents donations. Your assigned fund balance went down slightly. This is largely made up of monies that are assigned to the next year's budget or your 2021 budget. But then you'll see your unassigned fund balance, again, remained relatively flat, for about 1.1% decrease. So while your fund balance did go down by about $2.1 million, your unassigned remained relatively unimpacted. So I'll have you scroll down to show the summarized income statement, which kind of tells you how you got there. So you did budget for fund balance to go down by about $1 million. You can see that fund balance went down by about $2.1 million. So your revenues are up slightly over budget, and that had to do with some routes to recovery or CARES Act money related to the pandemic that the city received in 2020. And your expenditures, you had a negative variance of about $1.3 million, and that was resulted from a transfer to capital projects that the city made during 2020. So I'll have you move on to page 44, and I will pause in a few slides, and Corey, if there's any additional commentary as well that you'd like to make, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, Carla, if I can just jump in for 1 second, because I just kind of want to reiterate what's going on with the total fund balance and the non-spendable fund balance. Basically, what you have happening here is we're unwinding a very large advance to TIF District number 6, and to a lesser extent TIF District 8 as well. So what you have happening is now that the city is getting repaid for that advance, right now that money that's owed to the city is considered non-spendable fund balance, meaning it's not in spendable form. So as that happens, then we've transferred that to capital to offset some of our borrowing needs. And the overall impact is that the total fund balance, is going down, but it's really because we're unwinding that large transaction. And I would also note that I remember as we were advancing more and more money to TIF District 6, 7 or 8 years ago, having to explain, okay, fund balance is going way up, but it's really not as positive as it looks because basically it's just one big IOU that's growing. Well, now we're seeing that IOU decrease. Technically, that IOU that was due to us is an asset, but of course, for us, maybe not the most valuable asset because it's not like cash in the bank. You can't spend it. For a long time, we didn't even know really when we were going to get that back. And really, the number that we focus on is the unassigned fund balance. That's actually what our fund balance policy is based on. So you do see stability in that number, which is really what we're targeting. We did bring it down a little bit, but as we talked about last year, we came in a little bit over our fund balance target for the end of fiscal year 2019. We made some decisions to utilize some of those funds to stay within our fund balance policy. So what you see there is really planned as far as coming back within our policy guidelines on fund balance.
Thank you, Corey. And I think the next slide summarizes that nicely as well. So this, as Corey mentioned, you do have a fund balance policy. So the black line on the graph at 50%, that is your targeted maximum, which is 6 months of the following year's budgeted general fund expenditures. And then the orange line is your policy minimum. And then the green line is what your actual has been. So last year you popped just above your maximum, and now it's been brought, again, just below. But you can see really how consistent your unassigned fund balance has been in the general fund and how you've maintained it close to your maximum amount. So very healthy general fund balance. And you should be commended for having a policy to manage that. So then the other metric that we look at, I'll have you move to page 45, is related to debt service. So this top graph is taking a look at your general obligation debt, which is debt that is secured by the taxing authority of the city. And the black line is your debt capacity. Again, that's your 5% of equalized value. That's by state statute. All municipalities have to follow that rule. And then your green line is your total GO debt outstanding. So you can see, again, you've stayed really consistent with your GO debt outstanding. And this is for, any GO debt outstanding related to city projects, TIF projects, and utility projects. So I'll have you scroll down where we'll show the total debt outstanding by type. And you can see 26 million is city related, but of that about 14.8 million is related to the TIF districts. And then just a little bit is utility, and then you can see the utility has revenue debt, and that is secured by the revenues of the utilities, and I'll address that in a few slides. So then I have another slide on page 46, which is also related to debt service, and this looks way more dramatic, frankly, than what it is, and that's just because, again, just given the axes and what we used for percentages, but the important thing here is to look at the green line, which is the city of Stevens Point, and what you have spent on principal and interest related to your non-capital expenditures. Again, we take non-capital expenditures out because that does fluctuate greatly from year to year. But anything, around that 20% mark, it just shows that, again, you have a nice balance of debt service in relation to your non-capital expenditures. And if you scroll down, it'll show just current to last year, again, your total principal and interest in relation to that non-capital expenditures. So pages 47 and 48, and then I'll pause before I finish my comments with the utility-related remarks. But here we just summarize the information regarding the 6 TIF districts that the city has. I think maybe what's important is to look at the bottom of this page where it talks about the calculation of net costs recoverable through TIF increments. So it'll show you like how much GO debt outstanding is for each TIF. So just for example purposes, TIF 5, the debt outstanding is about 3.8 million. So when I said before of, there's about $14 million related to TIF debt, that's where I pulled this from. And then you look at any fund balance related to those TIFs, and then it just shows you how much do you have left to accumulate in TIF increment, and then we give you some dates, like last dates to incur costs and so forth. So I'm going to pause there to see if there's any questions on the general fund or debt results, and then I'll finish with just a few comments on the utility results, as I know that Jody Dobson did go through that earlier with the water and sewer commissioners. But any comments or questions, or again, Corey, if you have any additional remarks as well.
Nothing here.
And I don't have any right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
So then I'll have you move to page 49, and I'm going to go through a number of metrics here related to the water utility. The water utility, as we were just focusing on the governmental funds, which are primarily finance. That activity is through property taxes and intergovernmental revenues. And then again, for capital projects, you're either financing that with cash on hand or again, levying for debt service to pay for it. Now I'm switching gears to the utilities, where again, their operations are they're financed through the charges for services. And the first being the water utility, which is a regulated utility by the Public Service Commission. They have a formula in which they determine how much your rates can be to get this rate of return, if you will. And again, your rate of return is in line with expectations and what is authorized. You continue to have positive operating results, with your green line being higher, your revenues higher than expenses. Your unrestricted reserves is your months of cash on hand, which you do continue to maintain sufficient unrestricted reserves. Debt coverage, and the next two items, your debt coverage, because you do have revenue bonds within the utility. You do have to maintain a certain debt coverage, and you are exceeding your debt coverage requirements. And then the bottom portion of this page just takes a look at how you've paid for your capital items, and about less than 25% of the capital assets are being financed with outstanding debt. So nice results for the water utility. Moving on to wastewater. The rest of the utilities are not regulated. They're essentially regulated by the city. Which again gives you more flexibility in terms of your rate making. Operating results, again, revenues exceeded operating costs in the top graph, as you can see. Unrestricted reserves and months of cash on hand. You did have some planned decreases in unrestricted cash reserves to use for projects. So that is something to just keep your eye on to monitor those cash on hand for the wastewater utility. Debt coverage, you're meeting your debt coverage ratio, and again, you're at about 50% of capital assets financed with outstanding debt. Moving on to the stormwater utility on page 51. Here, your revenues did exceed operating costs in 2020. You see a slight increase in unrestricted cash reserves, and there is some debt outstanding, which you've met your debt coverage, and again, very little debt outstanding related to your stormwater results. So we have two more utilities to go to, our enterprise fund. Page 52 is your airport. So operating expenses exceed revenues. So there is a loss, but about 80% of that is due to depreciation, and the remaining is offset by tax revenues. So the utility does, or the airport does, have cash reserves, and there is no debt related to the airport. And then lastly is transit. So revenue mix is consistent with prior years. Federal and state aid provide 56% of total revenues. Expenses remain stable, with the largest being labor and benefits, and that is consistent with the industry. And there were some decreases in expenses this year, with the largest, again, being labor and benefits, which again were consistent with the industry. So I would say the only thing on the utility side is just keeping an eye on the cash balance within the water utility, but again, the city's been proactive in monitoring its utility or enterprise operations as well. So overall, very positive financial results for the city and the utilities, but I'll pause there. That ends my prepared remarks, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Thank you, Carla. I would go to the committee first and then to see if there's any questions or clarifications that the committee would have for Carla.
Doesn't look like anything here.
Thanks.
Okay. I'd also look to the both Alder Jennings and Alder Slowinski who are online, and I don't want to miss an opportunity to allow them to ask a question.
Nothing for me, thank you.
Thank you. Alder Slowinski, anything? Apparently not. All right. Thank you, Carla. I find it very interesting, but this is what I do. I'm a government administrator, so I appreciate this sort of work, and like the way you've presented it was easy to follow. I think we probably have some things to follow up on in the future, but I'm sure, no question in my mind, we'll take care of that.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes, Alder Slowinski.
Sorry about that. No, it was my screen was locked in Mayor Lee's the presentation. I couldn't get in to unmute myself. So
Oh, okay.
I had no further questions. Thank you for calling on me.
You're very welcome. Didn't want to exclude you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We really appreciate the opportunity to work with you. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out directly. Or again, I know Corey can likely address a number of your comments as well. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much. And thank you again for allowing me to present virtually. I do appreciate that. And have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you so much. The hard work that went into this, and to staff too. So thank you. All right. Moving on. We have item 3, which is a review of budget variations for the 2020 fiscal year. And there was some information, but I will let Corey take it from here.
Sure. So the memo was in your packet. As long as we're reviewing the fiscal performance for 2020, just wanted to make you aware of 2 budget variations. One was related to the IT department, and basically the IT department did go over budget for 2020, and that was mainly due to overages in IT contracted services as well as software license fees. One of the big issues there was we had some pretty robust contracted services going into 2020. We were starting with a fairly new IT manager. The plan was to scale those services back, and then of course COVID-19 hit, and I guess a workload as far as getting everyone transitioned to working from home meant that those services weren't able to be scaled back quite as quickly as was initially anticipated. And then also for software license fees, we are seeing a trend of software companies, rather than wanting to sell you the software outright, which would be a capital expense, they're going more in the direction of having subscription fees where you pay every year or every month, which is a real concern because for us, that moves those expenses from the capital budget to the operating budget. So that is something that we're still trying to work through, but that has been a cost pressure on the operating budget for information technology. And then the other category that went over was other general government. Part of that was planned with the grant program related to COVID-19. We had to create a line item and put it somewhere, so we put it in other general government, which was the main source of that budget variation. And then the other driver was unusually high legal expenses from 2020. Primarily related to a personnel matter. So, and we don't need any action on this, but I just wanted to, make the Finance Committee and Council aware of what is going on. So.
I appreciate that. David, Aldershar, did you have a question?
Thanks. A personnel matter under the purview of the Police and Fire Commission by any chance?
Yes.
Intuitive, aren't you?
Yeah, and unfortunately, we might have the same issue for 2021 budget performance as well. So,
Thanks. Other questions for Corey from the committee?
Nothing on this end. Nope.
Okay. Anyone online? Alder Slawinski, you're on the committee. Did you have any questions about the overages?
No, I'm good, thank you.
All right, thank you. Alder Jennings? All right, thank you. Excellent. Thanks, Corey.
Oh, she just went mute.
Madam President, you
You're on mute.
muted yourself.
Oh, I did. There we go. I'm sure many people want to do that to me anyway. All right, thank you, and thanks, Corey, for bringing that to our attention. We can move on then to the next item.
yes, so the next item was discussion of the 2022 city budget. And this is something that we typically do every August to give you an initial look as far as how things look so far. It is still very early in the process. I did outline in the memo sort of where we are at. And basically, I think that we should be able to meet our budget challenges for 2022. But unfortunately, at least at this point, it doesn't appear that we'll really have extra money to spend beyond our typical inflationary cost increases.
We never have extra money.
2019 and 2020, we had a little flexibility
To work with,
to
yeah.
work with in
Right.
those years. But our net new construction figure was actually pretty good. It was 2.81%, which is better than last year. But you do have some offsetting factors there. One is we also expect higher cost of living adjustments for going into 2022, and that's because our cost of living adjustments for the employees on the pay plan are based on inflation, and inflation is running higher, so that's a factor. And then the other thing to remember as well is that, so net new construction is just one piece as far as our operating levy with property taxes, but we also have quite a bit of reliance on some state aid programs that do not grow with inflation. So even though that 2.81% seems high, when you consider our other revenue sources that don't grow at all, the overall number is quite a bit lower. And then I think a lot of it sometimes just comes down to which way various items go as far as beyond net new construction. And so far, we're taking a couple of hits just as far as costs going up or revenues going down, which kind of knock us into the direction of, not having extra money available, I guess, if I can.
All
You know.
right. New year, same message. So, questions for Corey at this point from the committee members?
This is Alder Slawinski.
Go ahead, Alder Slawinski.
I guess just going off of Corey's memo regarding some ideas on how to balance the budget, I guess, if you will, and he brings up the workman's comp, possibly adjusting the premium. I guess I just want to make a statement, obviously, that even if we don't have workman's comp claims, in a 1 year, I mean, that doesn't mean one substantial injury could just completely wipe us out. So I mean, and I'm sure Corey's taking that into consideration, but I guess I just want to make that point. So thank you.
Yeah, very good point. Excellent point. Alder Shore, I see that you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Couple of things. First, a comment that to reaffirm that priority on doing right by current employees. You already are there, and just kind of echo that that's important to all of us. But then a question. I'm always mindful and remembering of the scary threat that we've had on the street construction side of kind of price trends that are scary. But at the same time, in this year, the way costs came in actually was better. Does that make us a little more optimistic about those pressures?
Okay. So, one of the things that we have to remember is we really have two different budgets. So we've got our operating budget and our capital budget. So, certainly if we see some price relief on road construction costs, that would be great. And that would help with that issue of being able to get more done for capital and get more done for roads. But it wouldn't necessarily help us on the operating budget.
I understand.
So,
Right, and anyway, I had trouble following that. The issue, of course, is sort of cost per mile or cost per fraction of a mile when we have this goal of getting so much done per year to not fall behind. This was a big issue in terms of the overall cycle of repaving streets. Thanks.
yep.
I'll go to the committee members first, Mr. Mayor, hang on, and just to make sure they have nothing. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Just to kind of add a few things, we're always working to try and figure out better ways to do things. We've got a bit of an influx of ARPA money, not nearly as much as some of the areas in metropolitan areas like Wausau, but we've been trying to figure out how to best utilize that. One of the first things that came up was housing. We're talking about housing now, and the eviction moratorium is coming up. So we've been talking with landlords, property managers. I've got a meeting with Central Wisconsin Apartment Association tomorrow. The eviction possibilities aren't any higher than normal here at Stevens Point. We're doing good with that. So if we move over to, okay, what's next? Our next biggest priority really is roads and infrastructure. Well, the ARPA money is pretty limited on what we can do. So we're working with staff right now, and we're not in a position to say which way we might want to recommend this, but we're working with staff to try and figure out how we can do more with less, as we always do. And those are the things that we're going to be looking forward to in the capital budget as well as the operating budget. Corey had talked about the software leases. Office 365, for example, you pay a monthly subscription fee, and they handle all of the updates and things like that for you. But do we need that? Can we handle Office 2020 and put it in capital and use that for 5 years? Yes, arguably you can. It's more labor intensive because we have to do all of the updates ourselves and push them out. So we're trying to figure out what options are going to work best. But I think Corey just wanted to give everyone a general overview of where we stand coming up on the 2022 budget. Then over the course of the next couple of months, we'll be bringing these things forward to council after working with staff as we formulate recommendations.
Thank you for the narrative. Any council members?
Nothing in here.
All right. My one question, Corey, I think Equalized Values are coming out, Monday? You think we're going to be okay?
So we had our preliminary equalized values have already come out.
Okay.
So the equalized value figure doesn't necessarily have an impact on the operating budget. It's really that net new construction component that has the impact. But as far as the equalized values, you did see growth in our equalized value due to both new construction and due to appreciation in market value. I'd say the appreciation in market value, depending on the class of property, I believe was about 3 to 5%, as far as at least the preliminary numbers, which I think would be expected. Honestly, I was surprised it wasn't a little bit more, but.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just, we saw the upward growth in our borrowing capacity, and I'm sure that that's relative to that equalized value and the growth in our construction, so.
Yes, yeah, equalized value definitely does impact our borrowing capacity as far as the limit, both the limit under state statute as well as the limit that we have under our ordinance.
Absolutely. All right, well, get ready, it's budget time, my favorite time of year. All right, item 5, discussion on completing a citywide reevaluation of assessed property values.
Director Konoski.
Actually, Nicole Tesh is also on the phone. She will be giving the committee an overview. Nicole works with Steve Shepro, who is the city's statutory city assessor. For those who don't know, we have one contracted city assessor within the assessing division of community development, and we have 2 full-time staffers, now a property appraiser and assistant assessor who help with the day-to-day operations of the assessing division. So once Madam Chair Nicole provides the overview, I've probably got some follow-up comments, and then if you're okay, we can open up for comments, questions, concerns. So
That works, thank you.
Nicole, you're on.
All right. So feel free to interrupt me at any point in time if you have any questions here, but I was just asked to basically put together a summary of what we do as far as the revaluation is concerned and answer any questions. But if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So basically, our job is just to determine assessed value. Obviously, our goal would be that assessed value is representative of market value. So that would be what it would sell for in the open markets. We obviously are not at market value every single year because that is only attained in a revaluation year. One of the things that we take a look at is the Department of Revenue has a requirement that we be within 10% of market value at least once every 5 years. Communities do that differently. Some of them will do it every year. Some will do them every 2 or 3 years. Some will do them as needed. That's really up to the community, but at a minimum, it must be once every 5 years, you have to be within 10%. So based on that, what we look at in our office, we kind of monitor sales every year. We take a look at our level of assessment and we keep track of that to see when it's kind of necessary to do something about that. The first year that we were out of compliance was for 2019. And then based on that timetable, we would see a second year of non-compliance for 2020, third year 2021. The DOR will give us a notice in that 4th year. So for 2022, we would get a first notice from the DOR, a second notice in 2023, and then beyond that, they issue us a ordered supervised assessment. We've never been part of that. We always do them before that it gets to that point. So how that goes, I'm not actually sure. I've never been a part of one. So our assessed values, like I mentioned, they're determined in a revaluation year. They stay the same then until the next revaluation year. We don't move those around. The only time we would make a change in between years is for new construction, physical changes to the property, something was added, removed, or we make corrections to the property information if somebody lets us know that there's something different. And keeping that in mind, that our assessed values stay the same from reval year to reval year. Market values obviously don't. They're not static. They change, and in a lot of cases, and especially recently in the last few years, they've changed pretty dramatically. There's been quite an increase for both residential and commercial. So, really our level of assessment is not a reflection of, a poor assessment. It's just how long it's been since you've last revalued and where your market has gone. So if you want to go to the next slide. So basically, revaluation, you all know what they are. It's just a process that we go through to update our values so that they reflect market value. As far as our end, the only thing we impact is the total municipal assessed value. As far as how that affects the tax rate, that's all dependent on the budgets and whether that stays the same or changes. We stay out of that part. We just try to make sure that our values are market value and leave it at that. Next slide. So, like I said, we look at sales every single year. This particular last year in 2020 was kind of interesting to see where we were going with COVID, and sales were still very strong. Based on our 2020 sales, the average assessment to sales ratio for residential was 83%. There was also a pretty good increase in commercial, so our overall assessment on commercial is at 85%. So they're not too far apart, which is what we like to see, but still outside of that 10%. All right. So this is our major class comparison, and if we're looking at 2020, which is the most recent one that they've provided, the 2021 will come out early next year. But we were at 87% overall, and you can see here in the past, 2018 was the last year we were in compliance, 2019 being the first year out. And I noticed you guys did just mention the statement of changes in equalized value. That preliminary study was released, and based on those preliminary numbers, which I don't expect to change, we're looking at a 2021 level of assessment for residential of about 83% and 86% for commercial, with an overall of 84%. All right. So basically, in summary, what we're looking at is the trend that we've seen in sales has, influenced those market values enough that our assessed values no longer meet that 10% range. So we are required to do an assessed value within a certain time frame. Revaluation is just that means to bring those assessed values to market value. And a little bit more about a revaluation. There's different ones that you can do. You can do a full revaluation, which is walking around and trying to get into every property, which is historically kind of difficult to accomplish at this point, especially right now. You can do exterior reviews, you can do a market interim, and that would be what we would suggest. It's a statistical analysis. We do look at all of the sales, all of the property information that we have, and create new models that would produce market value. And then we review those. And sometimes that review involves drive-by. It sometimes does involve site visits if needed. But that's kind of on a case-by-case basis. And then, from my understanding, at least what was talked about, is that a completion date of 2023 would put us in that range to have it done before the DOR would issue an order of supervised assessment. And then on the last slide, I do have a link on here if you do want more information about the revaluation process and the DOR's involvement. There's a document on the DOR's website that's pretty good. Otherwise, you're welcome to contact us personally anytime, myself or Steve are happy to answer any questions about assessment or the revaluation.
Excellent, thank you, Nicole. Appreciate the summary and also the link to the resource. That's very helpful. People can revisit that. So.
You've got Director Badoon approaching the podium as well.
Pronowski. Pronounced it wrong.
Pronowski. Sorry.
Pronowski.
I'm looking at names here and.
Wrong one. Okay, first, I just want to make sure that the committee does not have any questions for Nicole.
You have David Shore.
I have one question.
And Alder Morrow.
Okay, Alder Shore, please.
Thank you, and I don't know whether this is more a question for Nicole or Ryan or both, but is there a choice in the timing between 22 and 23, or no, is it all basically pointing towards 23?
The timeline component is we're out of compliance.
No, I get that.
And so essentially it's got to be done by 2025. Otherwise the state will do essentially a state supervised assessment, and that will cost the city exceptionally more than if we do it in-house.
Are we deciding, so I understand the compliance issue and the options in-house versus contracting it out. My question is about when the reassessment is done. And I see that the time frame is for 2023, and I'm just curious whether there's consideration for next year or not.
Yeah, and Nicole, feel free to jump in if you have a better answer. But essentially, we've seen a hyperinflation of the real estate market locally. I think that's pretty evident. I will say that in the last probably 3 months, we've seen a really significant correction starting to occur. Homes are staying on the market longer. Prices are finally starting to drop, which is a sign of a healthy correction coming. And so really, by doing it in end of 2022, starting of 2023, with it completed in 23, you are taking that into consideration.
You're
that correction
you're giving
into
more
consideration.
time for whatever correction it is.
Right.
The work will be
To
done next
really
Correct.
fully,
for 2023.
Yeah, so the super hyperinflated market that we've had the last several months will be less taken in consideration because it occurred in 2021. When we started in 2022, we'll be looking at that real estate market, which, all trends considered, looks at a correction.
Good question, Alder Shore. I was going to ask similar, so thank you. Alder Morrow,
Yeah,
please.
the question I have is, I thought we had a major reassessment a couple of years ago, right after we hadn't done one like in 10 years.
Yeah, the revaluation was more than a couple of years ago.
Should
And
have-
yeah, that was a big deal because it hadn't been done in so long
Yeah.
that there were major changes. So
Correct.
we made a policy to do it more frequently so there wouldn't be as significant of change.
that's how long we've been around.
Yeah.
Is that it feels like,
When was the last one done?
There was a reval done in 2003. The city had started a reval in 2008, but that was essentially canceled because of the Great Recession. There was a huge concern at that time where if you do a reval, and at that time you're doing it based on the 06-07 market, which was
Horrible.
right, that you would start running into issues where you're essentially pricing folks out of their home, and that's really what the city wanted to avoid. So at that time, that was a policy decision to stop the reval. We had to update it because we fell out of compliance, of course, with those numbers that DOR gives us. We came into compliance and we fell back out of compliance. In 2017, we did another reval, and that's where we saw a lot of the public outcry that, oh my gosh, 14 years later, the values from 2003 to 2017, there was big changes. So actually what you're likely to see from the assessing division is a hope for a reval every 4 to 6 years, just so we avoid that situation over again.
Alder Shore's right, it has been a while.
Yeah, all right. Any other members of the committee? Alder Dalton, Alder Slowinski?
This is Alder Slowinski.
Yes, go ahead.
I guess I have a few questions. So I appreciate the, planning ahead, looking ahead, possibly doing this. I guess my question is, say 2022, we fall back within that 10%. Now, basically, we're back in compliance again. And I guess my question is, we're talking about a contract here. We signing this and we're going to move ahead no matter what, or is it going to be basically if we fall back into compliance? Nobody has a crystal ball. Are we going to, basically, it's not going to happen? I just heard Director Konusky basically say that, 4 to 6 years, we'd like to be doing these. But when I first saw this, my first thought was, and I'm sure I'm going to see this from a lot of constituents, is, oh, look at the city's going to try to grab this spike in the housing market and try to utilize that to, raise assessments. I guess I think that's a fair concern. And I know that if we do this, that's probably going to come out quite a bit from our constituency. So again, I guess it's just a question, contract, are we locked in once we move ahead with this, or if we fall back into compliance, in 22, is that basically, are we going to put it on hold? Thank you.
Good question, Alder Slowinski. I had very similar worries as well. Director?
Yeah, so if we were to fall back into compliance, although as Nicole indicated, we're definitely falling in the opposite direction, further and further out of compliance. I think it would be appropriate to include as part of the contract with forward appraisal that there's an opportunity for us to look at, maybe canceling the contract for the reassessment if we were to fall back into compliance. Just because you fall into compliance you know, in 2022 doesn't mean you'll stay in compliance in 2023. And if you're already on the fringe of that 90%, which we're below that, it's highly unlikely that will come back into compliance. So, yeah, I think that's a good idea. It's definitely something that we can talk about with Steve and Nicole as part of their contract duties for the reassessment. So, I should state really the role of the finance committee and of the council is really to decide how you want to finance the reassessment. When the assessment letters go out, which everybody in this room will eventually get one, the challenges to the reassessment won't go through finance or through the common council. That will go through the board of review, which is really an independent organization that's appointed by the mayor, that's run through the assessing department, and they look at each case by case, folks who challenge their new assessments. So really, your role tonight is to look at whether or not you want to finance this and how you want to finance it. And really, you've got three opportunities. We do have a proposal from Forward Appraisal for roughly $36,000. That would include use of the 2 full-time staffers in the assessing division. The second opportunity is you folks could say, let's go back out, let's get a full proposal. And I will tell you, the Village of Plover literally just did this. They actually went out twice for their proposal. They received, I think, 1 or 2 proposals back. Both were north of $300,000. And we can stick it to the DOR and say, hey, we're not going to do it. And they can do a state assessment on the city of Stevens Point and then send us the bill for it, which is likely going to cost somewhere around $500,000. So really, the policy side and the finance side makes the most sense to go with folks who know our community well, and that's Forward Appraisal and the city's staff as well. So.
All right, I'm going to go to any alders who have questions, clarifications.
Nothing in the community room.
Okay. Alder Jennings, you are online. I want to give you the opportunity to ask questions if you have any.
I think she was on mute.
No questions, thank you.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, again, this is not an action item. It is, I'm very grateful to everybody involved in bringing this presentation together to help bring about the awareness rather than, just sort of launching it on you. So I appreciate the good discussion. The questions that were asked are exactly those which I had concerns about. So kudos to my colleagues. I appreciate the way you think. So if there's nothing else, we'll move on to our next item. And that is discussion and possible action on awarding a bid for the demolition of 325 Division Street to Kyle Pluck Trucking and Excavation. I would entertain a motion to bring it to the floor.
Tomorrow, so moved.
We have a motion from Alder Morrow. Is there a second?
Alder Dalton, I'll second.
And we have a second from Alder Dalton. Is there any discussion on the motion?
I'm really happy that this is a lot less than any other bid.
So are we.
By about $10,000 at least.
Always gives me pause, but anyway, we'll take it as a gift at this point. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Aye. Anyone opposed would be no. Abstentions? Motion carries. Next item, discussion and possible action on modifying the method of funding sidewalk repairs and sidewalk continuation projects. There was a very nice memo in our packet that discussed this. And this, I'm sure, doesn't come as any surprise to anybody. We've had kind of periphery discussions on this. So now's an opportunity to bring it to the floor for discussion. Corey?
Yeah, so if you want me to just give a brief overview, as outlined in the memo, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Street Safety Commission requested that we at least take a look at this. They of course understand that it's, Finance Committee and Council that would make this kind of decision, but they wanted us to take a look at, instead of levying special assessments on property owners for sidewalks, both for sidewalk repairs and sidewalk continuation projects in existing neighborhoods, to look at funding that through the regular capital budget, basically funding it through the property tax levy the same way that we fund other types of capital infrastructure, and look at that option rather than special assessing individual property owners for these types of projects. Their concerns are that the special assessment process makes property owners a little bit less likely to support sidewalk projects, and they're also concerned that the sidewalk special assessment process is regressive in that it disproportionately impacts low-income residents. So basically, it's a situation where, for property owners, you might be paying one way or another, either through the tax levy or through the special assessments. If we would look at transferring this to the tax levy and the capital budget, we're looking at needing about $90,000 in the capital budget. And of course, that number would vary based on how much you want to do in sidewalk continuation. But a modest amount of sidewalk continuation and the typical sidewalk repairs, that's about what we're estimating. And then the impact on the tax rate would be about 5 cents per thousand in value. So for a house that's valued at $100,000, you'd be looking at $5. Or a house that's assessed at $200,000, you'd be looking at $10. And then, in exchange for that, if you have a sidewalk, you'd no longer get the special assessments for those repairs. So this is something that, the offices that are involved with this, which would be the DPW engineering, the city clerk's office, and my office actually to a lesser extent, we've all talked about this. One of the things from the staff perspective is that there is a lot of staff time that does go into the special assessment process. And as far as billing out all the individual squares of sidewalk for sidewalk repairs and so forth. So the three offices that are involved are supportive of this change. But really it's a policy decision for the Finance Committee and the City Council to make in terms of how you want to fund sidewalks or how you think that they should be paid for. And then, the other item to note is, we'll have to really think through the speed of implementation, especially since you have people, even in 2021 who are already paying for bills that they've had for sidewalks. It's just something to discuss in terms of equity. Do we need to phase out the special assessment process over a couple of years, or would we want to make a dramatic change if we decide to move in this direction? Obviously, if we don't decide that we want to move in this direction, then that would be a non-issue, but that would just be something to think about in terms of the pace of a potential transition. So.
Thank you, Corey. It's an interesting topic, and I really welcome each one of the committee members to give me your thoughts.
Madam Chairman, I believe you need a
Holly's ready to
motion.
go first.
I believe you need a motion.
Yeah, we do need a motion because we listed this as an action item. I'm trying to figure out what the action would be or the motion would be at this point.
I mean, it
We're not
would be
gonna vote on
it would be
this
to
now.
either change or leave the
Possibly.
method the same. Either to change.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't know if, obviously, that's an either or, but then there's also the question of phase in or phase in over time, or take the Band-Aid off and just get it over with. So I'm happy to entertain a motion if there is someone who's prepared to do that.
I mean, I don't think we're at any point in time even close to really even voting on this at this point, because there hasn't been any real we haven't really discussed this at all. There's a lot of ramifications to this as well.
Might I suggest that the safest motion then, because you can always vote it down or make amendments to it, would be to remain status quo.
That would be a great idea. Yes, I make a motion to keep the status quo as we are right now.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to remain at status quo for how we fund sidewalks. Happy to entertain discussion. Alder Dalton, I see you raised your hand first.
I appreciate this being brought up because I know, and I do appreciate from hearing from staff that the amount of time that it seems like is laid out in administering this really becomes burdensome. I'm wondering if part of the consideration, if increasing the wheel tax by $2-3 might be an effective way rather than shifting out of the capital, that was just considered as an alternative for the funding.
Unfortunately, the wheel tax is a county thing,
Yeah, it's
so.
not a city.
But the city can have a wheel tax
The
as well.
city, yeah.
Yeah,
I wouldn't recommend it,
I wouldn't recommend
no,
it.
but you
No.
could.
yeah. Alder Shore, please.
Thank you, Chair. So first to note that last time around, we decided not against a wheel tax. I mean, it's not comfortable for me to ever to reject a staff recommendation, and certainly I love sidewalks. It will be a surprise to nobody. I mean, I guess I'd be curious to learn more about the equity consideration. I hadn't thought that necessarily, that this would be regressive in fall, especially, but I guess I'd be open to hearing more about that. But I will say why I lean against changing. It's a couple fairness considerations. One, overall, way beyond this, we've been in favor more of collecting from people who particularly, service fees, or, when we are able to have someone pay for something that is directly associated with them, we have liked that, rather than putting it onto property taxes. But the other fairness consideration, there was a brief mention of it before, is everybody else who has paid. We started a sidewalk continuation just a few years ago. We haven't been doing it for that long. But I will say that as one of the first two districts that did it, there were definitely people who paid. And so, for me, those are two pretty big strikes against the change.
Alder Slowinski, I'd be happy to hear from you. Your thoughts?
I guess I'm torn with this one. Like Alder Shore had said, we just started this process of these sidewalk continuations, and we've all sat in meetings where you hear the residents that are being assessed for these, like, what, I don't want this thing in front of my front yard. I not only have to pay for it in my front yard, now I have to maintain it. I've heard that side of it, but yet on the other side, it's, to kind of spread it all throughout the city. I'm torn on this one. I guess a question I have is, have we reached out, or have we polled other municipalities? How are they, are they doing it by assessment? Are they doing it as adding it to just the regular budget? I guess I'd be curious to see where that is. But yeah, I'm not prepared to vote either way tonight. Thank you.
Can I add a piece of information?
Certainly.
Madam Chair, thanks. So just for people to know, because I don't think they necessarily do, there has been an issue, well, how do we decide where sidewalk continuation is being done? And this is something that I've been in touch with Director Badun about, and I don't think that we've heard that it's pretty recent, but there is now a new scoring system for which places come up for the continuation each year. We now have that scoring system to make it more objective and data-based.
Is that a question for Director Badun?
No, it's not a question. I was adding the information. It would be good to one of these months soon hear more about that. But I just wanted to let people know that there's kind of been some regularization coming into effect for it.
I know in the past, they've put that with any reconstructs for roads, if they've done water lines, sewer lines and so on. So they've kind of bundled all of that in so that they don't have to tear up people's lawns more than once.
Thank you. Any other committee member? I want to make sure I've covered what the committee has to say before I go to other alders.
Think you're good in here?
All good.
Okay, thank you. And then the only other alder would be Alder Jennings, who is online, if no one in the room had any questions, comments.
I see nothing.
Did Alder Jennings have her hand up?
Hang on, Alder Zarazu is coming to the microphone.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Alder Zarazua, District 4. This is an interesting thing to consider. I think there's just so many valid points on either side. The part about saying the sidewalk is directly attached to the homeowner, yes, they benefit from curb appeal and all of that, but we're also saying that they still would pay for it initially, they just wouldn't be paying for the, okay. I see a no. So I guess to me, I see sidewalks the same way as roads, that it's something that benefits the community. And so it makes sense to me that we would continue that maintenance like we do with roads. So I guess that's the part that makes sense to me, that, we want the roads to be safe for all of our citizens. I use the sidewalk in front of my house, obviously, but barely compared to how many people are walking past my house. And I understand how it could be difficult for a person who is of lower income to have to take on the repair cost of maintaining their sidewalk. So I'm glad this is coming up for us to discuss and think about and talk to our constituents about. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Zarazua. Anyone else in the room?
Yep,
that I have missed?
now we've got a Trevor Rourke trail. We've got Alderperson Kneebone with Alderperson Fischler on deck.
Okay, there we go.
So Alder Kneebone, 7th District, 5718 Sandpiper Drive. Thinking about someone like myself who's on a fixed income, it's going to be a lot harder for me to come up with the cost to repair the sidewalk in one fell swoop than it is for me to pay $5 or $8 or $10 a year on my property taxes. Not that that's not going to be an issue either on a fixed income. So I think that this really it could be a help to folks, not necessarily poor, but on fixed incomes, we'll just say that. Also, the one flaw in that is that if you tie it to property taxes, every nonprofit in the city gets out of having to pay for a sidewalk. So there would have to be some kind of billing, I think, because if we're going to sidewalk the whole city, the nonprofits will also benefit. So they should have a stake in the outcome as well. But I think it's definitely worth discussing. I'd rather pay for it year by year on my property taxes than have to come up with $1,500 or $2,000 or even $1,000. And then you have to pay interest on that if you finance it. So you kind of get penalized because you don't have the money. So anyway, that's mine.
Point of information, just on that, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. Just on that last point. So I believe St. Paul's Methodist had to pay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So under the current system, right, if that's by your property, the current system collects actually more than the new would.
Thank you, Alder Shore. Alder Fischler, please go ahead.
I just had a couple thoughts. So if everyone was paying, some people who don't even have sidewalks would be contributing, right? So wouldn't that essentially give us more money for sidewalk continuation projects? If that happened? Just a general question, I guess, and then,
Not necessarily.
no?
So I would say what you're doing is you're spreading that burden out a little bit more. So if we wanted to keep the same capital budget in terms of what we are spending on sidewalks, then you're going to spread that burden out, more. So that's where, the impact on the average homeowner is, probably in the $5 to $10 to $15 range. But now is that's always an option, whenever we're talking about capital funding in terms of how aggressive you want to be and basically making that decision as far as how much we want to spend on something and what we're willing to pay for it or what we're willing to levy in property taxes to do that.
I guess, is there any way to figure out how much, for this year, how much we're paying, or people are paying for continuation projects, and then comparing that to what, that might be in the future? Would that make sense to maybe make that comparison?
That's what you had talked about
You just talked about it.
earlier, right?
Sure. So.
Oh, did I miss that?
Or I guess, okay, so what I looked at was what we would need to budget in capital for this to get rid of the special assessment process. And I came up with about $90,000. And I worked with Public Works a little bit to look at basically the last 3 or 4 years to figure out what would be a good number. Now, there was at least one recent year where it was significantly higher than $90,000 because we did a pretty aggressive sidewalk continuation project. But that's the number that we came up with, kind of taking it into consideration that, okay, you're going to have years where you do more and years where you do less. I guess, are you asking the impact on an individual homeowner as far as, taking somebody who's had to pay for some sidewalk repairs and what they had to pay for those repairs versus what they might pay in property taxes?
No, I think it was in your memo, so my apologies.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that was the question. And then the other question I had was in terms of people having to do sidewalk shoveling, how would that impact that ordinance? That would be my other question.
So they would
Have to still be
still
responsible.
have to do the sidewalk shoveling, and that's something that the city would not have the personnel, the staff, the manpower to take that over.
Okay.
So, I think, this is something that we can look at in terms of covering the cost of repairs and replacement, but for sure, the citizens will have to continue to be the ones to do the shoveling or the snow blowing of the sidewalks.
Okay, that's all I had. Thanks.
Yep.
Right, thank you.
think that's
Alder Jennings.
Done in here.
Pardon me?
I think you're done in here.
Okay, I was just gonna go to Alder Jennings then, because I could see Alder Keemer, and it doesn't look like she was getting up to go to the podium, so, or lectern. Go ahead, Alder Jennings, please.
Thank you, President Johnson. I've been talking with staff about this 4.5 years ago, at least. Bringing us back to staff supports this, so I'm hearing that. That's an important thing. If we follow Alder Shore's argument, we should be assessing alleys, which are basically driveways. So why aren't we special assessing driveways? To Alder Zarazu's point, this is a public good. Sidewalks are transportation. They're part of our our roadway. The primary resistance that we get to sidewalks is people having to pay for them. I think often the shoveling argument is really just masking what the real concern is having to pay for it. And do we say we're a walkable community and not support it through a public good? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So I fully support this, and I hope it comes back because, again, it's something staff has wanted. It will benefit them, and overall it benefits the community and fits with what we say we are an eco-municipality. So thank you.
Thank you, Alder Jennings. Since everyone spoke, but I'm chairing, in order for me to comment, I would have to hand the chair off to the vice chair, who is Alder Slowinski. So Alder Slowinski, would you want to proctor the rest of the meeting so I can provide some comment?
I can.
Thank you. Just trying to follow Robert's rules. We only have a couple more items, but I want to be able to provide my comment here. You'd have to obviously call for the vote and then take the last item and adjourn. Because typically if the chair relinquishes their position to the vice chair, then the vice chair would close the meeting. So thank you, Alder Slowinski, for taking the chair so I can comment. I live on a corner, so the sidewalk is used mostly by people walking by. I mean, do I walk on it? Yes. It is a public good. It is a transportation corridor. The sidewalk is within the right-of-way of the roadway, which is covered by our tax base, either through general repairs or through the capital improvement project system. This is how we actually fairly and equitably fund our sidewalks, which are such a critical component of a walkable community. We have areas that can benefit from this, and if we find a different way to fund this, I think we'll find greater support for allowing people of all abilities, 4-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 80-year-olds and walkers, to be able to walk safely and not have to worry about walking on roadways. So I strongly support moving to putting sidewalks on the levy. I will be voting against the motion, and I will be happy to bring it out at council next week if the motion is successful as it was presented. Thank you, Alder Slowinski. You have the chair.
Alder Slowinski, I have some comments if you allow it.
I suppose I'll let you talk. Go ahead.
First of all, I think our sidewalk continuation plan is perfect. We have a walkable community. We've strived for that. We have a way to maintain it and pay for it. To talk about equity, we can do the analysis, but I can tell you that some of those larger groups generally are going to be people who are of a higher income status, because most of the people that have lower incomes generally live in the core areas of the city that already have sidewalks. Not 100% true, but that does happen. Now we can look into that further. My concern with putting it on the levy is mainly because I think it's going to jeopardize the project. If you put it on the levy as a capital expenditure, it is up for consideration every single year. Right now, you have a guaranteed funding source to make this happen. If you put it in the capital, it may not be this year, it may not be next year. We will likely not be here. It'll be a different council, perhaps a different mayor, who have different priorities. And when you have a $6.5 million capital expenditure and you've got $9 million in requests, what do you think gets cut? Now you say, okay, we can borrow more to cover that. So we'll borrow a little bit more. We'll increase it to, let's say, $7.5 million. Okay, well, what about those $2 million you had to cut? Do sidewalks have to go up against a new restroom in a park every time? Or a new street? Or a new alley? Or a a new parking lot for the fire department, a new garage for the police department, a streets garage. And if you put it in with the capital, you are putting it in the mix with everything else, and those priorities are going to be those of the councils that come after you. What you have now is a guaranteed funding source and a program that has been successful. Everybody's paid for their sidewalks. Grumblings will happen, of course. I just want to throw that out there as a word of caution.
All right, thank you for your comments, Mayor.
Alder Slawinski, you have Alder Shore's hand up.
Anyone else that-
This is
All right,
working
go ahead,
swimmingly.
Alder Shore.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, on the sidewalk continuation, the more I think of it, the more I think leaving it the way it is makes sense. Alder Kneebone raised the, sort of nonprofits whose properties are off the tax rolls. And we had an instance like, I happen to be, really have followed this closely. So there's the St. Paul's Methodist case. But I'll say in the very first year, when it was in my district, I'll tell you who the biggest, who paid the biggest bill on sidewalk continuation. It was a landlord. It was the Autumn Ridge Apartments, which, are Stanley, Sumery, and Lindbergh. And there weren't sidewalks on Lindbergh or Sumery. And that landlord, so, that was a case of it being quite progressive as taxation, right? So having said that, I don't know. I mean, I might be open to on the repair side. I don't know. I mean, because from that workload perspective, I'm guessing that's because that's more people. That's a lot more people. I mean, my sense is that that's. Well, I'd be interested in knowing how that's costed out, right? Relative, within that 90,000. Is that a lot more of it? I don't know. But I think from that fairness perspective, maybe getting rid of the annoying thing of the individual stones. I might be more open to that, but that fairness, I think we're kind of glossing over that. Everyone in the city where there is a sidewalk, they paid for the sidewalk. So this, in my own mind, I have these two issues separate of, I could not be more pro sidewalk. But I'm not quite yet seeing this issue as like, well, if you're pro sidewalk, then, this is how you're going to pay for it. So anyway, I've said enough. Thanks. I mean, except that, all of which might be part of the picture of maybe we're not ready to decide this finally this month.
Call for the vote.
Alder
Alder Slawinski. Yep.
I don't know if there's anyone else that has any comments.
I have Alder Kneebone.
From the committee.
Alder Slawinski, I have Alder Kneebone in the back.
All right, go ahead, Alder Kneebone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mary Kneebone, District 7 Alder. If the sidewalks come to my street, which they will eventually, I hope, because everybody in my neighborhood now walks in the street when they walk, the mailboxes are across the street. So I assume that when the sidewalk comes, it'll be on the north side, which is my side. So I'll have to pay for it, which I really don't mind. I'll also have to maintain it. I'll have to shovel it. Not a problem. But all the people across the street in my neighborhood can walk up and down that sidewalk for free, basically. Maybe the neighborhood should pay for the sidewalk if it's only going to be on one side of the street. Maybe both sides of the street should be assessed the cost because they have the immediate benefit, but only the person whose yard it's in has to do the maintenance and pay the price. So, just a thought.
Alder
Thank you,
Slawinski,
Alder.
you're good.
You good now?
I think so.
I think this is a great discussion. Again, there's no other comments or questions from either the committee or people online or people in the room. I guess we will, I guess the motion is to leave our sidewalk repair and continuation project as is, where we do special assessments to the property owners that are adjacent to the sidewalk. So I guess I will call that all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
You want to call a roll?
I think it's probably best to call a roll, Alder Slawinski. Maybe Corey could do that?
Yep, I can call the roll. Slawinski,
No.
Shore,
To keep the system as it is, aye.
Morrow,
Aye.
Johnson,
No.
Dalton.
No.
Okay, by a vote of 2 to 3, the motion fails.
So now I guess I'll call for a new motion.
Mr. Chair, this is President Johnson. I'd like to make a motion to shift to the new form of funding our sidewalks through the levy.
Or a second?
Alder Dalton, I'll second.
All right. I'm assuming that there's no further discussion.
I have one comment. We are talking about raising everybody's taxes in this city right now for everybody, with very little discussion about it with anybody outside of who's on the council right now. And nobody, I think, in the city was thinking that their taxes would be raised right now. And I think this would be a big mistake for everybody if we ended up, if we approve this now with a little bit of discussion without any kind of community input at all.
Alder Slawinski, you have Attorney Beveridge approaching the lectern.
Just a note, and certainly Corey, you can correct or clarify anything I say here, but obviously we still have to go through a budgeting process, and a vote of this committee right now with this type of agenda item is not legally sufficient to actually set mechanisms for funding of capital items. Your point's well taken in terms of it representing a serious change in the way we fund these things. However, just to be advised that this vote doesn't actually have quite the full effect.
My understanding is this would be a policy decision, and then the next step would be the budget process, so my motion stands.
And I guess that's the direction when the motion was made by President Johnson, that was where I was seeing this going, and is, we're gonna basically move ahead, but we weren't locking in any type of budgetary numbers. So, any other comments, questions? All right, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Do we need a voice vote again?
Or a roll call?
A roll call would be appropriate, but I think it was exactly the opposite,
All right,
so.
sorry.
You want to call a roll?
Yeah, sure,
think I
just
should.
for diligence.
Sure.
Dalton,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Morrow,
No.
Shore,
No.
Slawinski.
Aye.
Okay, by a vote of 3 to 2, the motion passes.
All righty, moving on to agenda item number, my computer's slow here.
8.
Agenda item number 8, discussion of possible action on approval of claims paid. I guess I would entertain a motion.
Move to approve claims, move to approve claims to be paid.
Alder-
Second.
Second.
Second?
Second.
You got a second? Okay. Any discussion from the committee? Any other alders? And anybody else that's out there
That's still here.
in the room or on the internet?
I see nothing.
All right. All right. All those in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries, and the next item, number 9, is adjournment. We will adjourn at 9:06.
Thank you.
Videos of these meetings are available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.